Here's Richard.
And I am your guest host, Hal Shurtleff, filling in for Rich Girard with my guest co-host, Tom Moore. And in studio with me is also my good friend, Dr. Punamatula Kishore. And this segment, we're here with the Camp Constitution, and I have the director. Tom, you've already woken up the state, so with the
I know, but it's one of the things at Camp Constitution that we do, no matter where we go to our field trips, is we all shout the revolutionary charge, which was huzzah.
Now, what is the negative to huzzah? You remember that?
Oh, phi.
Phi, right. So how come we don't say that when we're disappointed with something, right? When we hear something we don't like to hear.
But it's funny, some of the we go on a different trip every year. We went to the ship, the USS Constitution, and so that was one of their cries, Old Ironsides.
That's right.
Huzzah.
That's right.
Her sides are made of iron. So during the tour guide said huzzah, and then 100 campers shouted huzzah at the top of their lungs and almost blew them off the decks of the ship. It was pretty funny.
Well, we have a guest online, Robert Brown. He is the creator of a phenomenal The Constitution is the Solution series, a 6-part lecture series that's put out by the John Birch Society. I highly recommend it, and they can get it through their website. He's also going to be in New Hampshire. I think it's your first time in this state, right, Robert? Oh, I think we lost him. He was on, and
we're having phone issues, but it's going to be resolved in just a minute.
Okay, so anyway, let me just mention that Robert Brown is a constitutional scholar, and he's going to be speaking in Maine and New Hampshire coming up later in January. Let me read you this little flyer. The Camp Constitution Speakers Bureau is hosting Dangers of an Article 5 Convention. Robert Brown, constitutional scholar and creator of The Constitution is the Solution series, and I'm going to hold it up to the camera. Can't hold it up to the mic because I can't see it. This presentation will include the history of an Article 5, the organizations and people behind a modern-day convention, and what can be done to stop a convention. It's going to be at the Nashua Public Library, 2 Court Street, Tuesday, January 24th at 7 p.m. Free admission. We'll pass the hat, of course. And later on in the day, early in the day, we're going to have a press conference at the LOB, Legislative Office Building, at 11 o'clock, where Robert Brown, and we're actually lining up other people from different organizations to speak out against an Article 5. And in New Hampshire, you have one application that was after 20 years of work from people like my good dear friend Bill McNally and other great patriots. We were able to rescind the state's calls, and then another call was added, and after we beat back a few of them. So we also, as a resolution, will be introduced to repeal this. So, Robert, how are you doing out there?
I'm doing very well. Can you hear me okay?
We hear you just fine, and you are 2-hour time zone away, so you're out milking the cows, I guess, and thank you for getting up this early and being on.
Absolutely.
Robert, you've been involved in this issue. You've testified at state houses. You've sort of locked horns like I have with some of the folks in favor of an Article 5 convention.
Mark Levine.
He's but the group called Convention of States. That's this. I use the word conservative in quotation marks, but they're the conservative side of this issue. And by the way, this is an issue that historically, at least in the last 50 or so years, is not a left-right issue like a lot of issues. It's
right.
There's people on the left that support one, and there's people on the left that oppose one. Common Cause is a leftist organization that I'm not particularly happy about, but they do take a good stand against this. Then you have groups like Convention of States that were founded by Mr. Mark Meckler that, of course, advocating one. So, Robert, you sent me a couple of audio clips that you wanted to comment. I think there was a debate, was it December 6th or 7th? That was with Mark Meckler, who was the founder of Convention of States. And by the way, Mark Meckler, he comes across as this great Tea Party guy, but his background, if you go to a website called livingroomconversations.org, you'll see that he proudly endorses this leftist group along with Van Jones. So you got to do a little research into some of the folks that promise the world. The clip number 1, if you could, Josh, to play that.
The greatest authority on the subject is Madison, who was at the 1787 convention himself and wrote in Federalist 40, if we want to know what the authority of the founders, of the framers actually was, look to their commissions. And this is important. I've read all of their commissions. The commissions are the documents that the people bring to the convention that says what their authority is. And you allege that 1787 ran away. I would ask you the question, and it's a critical question. Have you read those commissions?
Well, Robert, have you read those commissions?
Actually, I have. You know, Meckler took a great risk here that if the opponent he was talking to had actually read those commissions, he could have really embarrassed him.
Now, we're talking about the for each state, the 12 states that represented at the first convention are under the Articles of Confederation, where the states, they claim, gave them sort of kind of blanket authority to do whatever they wanted to do.
Right. And this, I think, is probably one of the most important issues to address, because they always claim the 1787 convention was not a runaway convention. And this is crucial for their argument. If they ever were to admit the 1787 convention had run away, they've really lost their entire argument, because now you have to admit that if we have a convention today, it can run away too. And so here we have Mark Meckler saying, have you read the state commissions? And he was really bluffing. And I want to call his bluff today.
So what is in those state commissions?
Well, one thing that he obviously overlooked is the fact that 9 of the 12 state commissions make a direct reference to the ratification requirements under the Articles of Confederation, saying that both Congress and all state legislatures would have to ratify whatever came out of this convention. And they clearly did not do that. They threw away that ratification process and created a much easier one. In fact, commenting on this, James Madison said it's admitted that the convention has departed from the tenor of their commission, and then he talks about how they replaced the ratification process.
And that was in the Federalist Paper 43, I understand.
Yeah, that's actually Federalist number 40.
40, okay, thank you.
So, so I think that's a smoking gun. Departed from the tenor of their commission would be a more fancy legalistic way to say turned into a runaway convention. Am I wrong there?
That's exactly what I'm pointing to. And so the thing I love about Mark Meckler's quote there is he starts off by saying the greatest authority on the subject is Madison.
Yep.
But then he makes claims that are contrary to what Madison said. Madison said it's admitted the convention ran away in modern language, departed from the tenor of their commission. And he's saying they did not depart from their commission. So who are you going to believe, Mark Meckler or the one he says is the greatest authority on the subject, James Madison?
Now, did James Madison wrote a letter to a friend of his, George Tuberville, I believe, and he said
yes.
He said something to the effect that he would shudder at the thought of another convention. Now, the Convention of States people claim that he was not referring to an Article 5 convention. Can you elaborate on that?
You know, this is one of those desperate attempts to distract from the evidence here, because in the George Tuberville letter that James Madison wrote, he clearly defined the convention he was warning against was one that would be upon the application of the legislatures of 2/3 of the states. It says that right in the letter. And so I ask you, can you think of any conventions that are triggered by the application of 2/3 of the legislatures of the states? And the answer is there's only one convention that he could possibly be talking about, the Article 5 Constitutional Convention.
And also, just for I know I actually was on here over a year ago debating the subject with a gentleman running for the Jim, who was a guest host last week. And Article 5 of the Constitution gives 2 ways to amend the Constitution. Jim Rubens, by the way, thank you. And I do like Jim, even though we strongly disagree on this issue. That first way, of course, was the only way that was ever been used, is where the Congress, 2/3 of Congress, passed the amendment. Then it goes to the states, and you need 3/4 of the states and before it becomes law. And that's the only way we've ever changed or amended the Constitution. The other way would be through an Article 5 convention where 2/3 of the states, and I use the word call, but it actually is apply. They pass applications, resolutions. The governors really have no legal say in how it's done. I mean, they may have some weight, but they don't have any. It's a state and usually resolutions are passed and they don't have any weight. They're just to honor somebody or to express their views, but this does have weight. This is one of the few resolutions that has legal weight.
Right.
So when 2/3 of the states have resolutions or applications, then Congress will have to call for an Article 5. We've never had an Article 5, and so let me ask you, too, Rob, this is one of the arguments of the Convention of States. They'll say that you Article 5 opponents, of course, they blame us for all the evils of the world, for dandruff, for abortion, for the national debt, and so forth. But they say it's in the Constitution, and you call yourself a constitutionalist, and you're a hypocrite because you don't want to use Article 5, the convention, Article 5 convention. So
Levin says that all the time.
Right. How do you address that?
Well, so is declaring war, but that doesn't mean
right.
that at every turn we should be declaring war. You need to look at if the circumstances are correct for the use of that tool. Now, the Founding Fathers
I use
repeatedly...
They let us Congress has power to raise taxes, but because I'm against the tax increase, does that make me an enemy of the Constitution, as Mike Farris claims?
I think if Obama was a strict constitutionalist, he would have declared war on the United States. Him as president, that would have been, because that's kind of what he did without congressional approval. But I'm just kidding, obviously.
Well, I'm sorry, I meant to interject, but go ahead. I want you to continue with the question.
Yeah, certainly. And one of the things we need to look to is repeatedly the framers of the Constitution described to us what the Article 5 Convention is for. And what they said it was for remedying errors in the Constitution. They never said it was for reining in an out-of-control federal government. For that, they gave other tools. And so what we need to look at is, are we in the condition today where we have flaws in the Constitution that are causing the problems we're facing? Or is it simply that we're ignoring and not applying the Constitution as it is written?
Well,
I would definitely say it's the latter.
A friend of mine, Adrian Villa, who's actually going to be helping cover your tour here in New England, said we don't have a paper problem, we have a people problem. And
exactly.
Our founders gave us the greatest remedy for that: frequent elections. Mm-hmm. Every 2 years. And it's interesting, some of these Article 5 supporters, are you trying to tell me we should get people elected? Well, that's a waste of time. Really? So should we sit at home and not get people elected and let the leftist take over, let them elect all their people? And one of the things that Mike Farris kind of spills the beans in his own video. You go right to the Convention of States website, and there's a 2.5-minute video. And Farris says sometimes you don't, I'm not paraphrasing, I'm not quoting verbatim, but pretty close. You don't have to change the personnel, but you have to change structure. Well, I'm not an engineer, but if you ask any engineer, when you change a structure, aren't you making some serious changes?
Yeah, take, for example, the foundation of a home. That's a major structural issue.
It may collapse if you change it a little bit too much.
Huge difference. Yeah, that really is effectively saying we're going to totally rewrite the entire structure of the Constitution and the United States as we know it.
All right, so let me just some more devil advocates questions here. Okay, you opponents of an Article 5 convention, it's still going to take 3/4 of the state legislators to pass this, and there's no way that these states, all these conservative Republican states, would ever pass a bad amendment, ever. So why would you oppose it?
Well, I would look to how many states have solidly stood up against Obamacare. That's how many I would say might oppose a bad amendment.
Right.
Yeah, that's a very good retort, yeah. And by the way, some of these so-called Republican states are up to their eyeballs, and they're part of the problem. And the other notion, too, is that the state legislators, they're all pure and noble. It's that evil Congress and the evil Supreme Court and the evil executive branch. They're all bad at the federal level, but all of the states are noble and pure. And I contend that the states' legislators and state officials have been willing participants in this federal overreach for over 100 years.
Right. Can I throw out a question to both of you that's rather timely? So I've heard different arguments about, we've come very close to having, this triggered. We've had, very, very close to the number that triggers it, which is how many states? Is that 2/3?
34 states would be
34.
Today,
so we've come close to that.